What's behind you doesn't matter. The Cannonball Run wasn't just a goofy car chase comedy. It was a lawless, adrenaline-fueled circus where real racers, movie stars, and daredevil stunts collided. Engines roared, egos clashed, and chaos unfolded behind the cameras in ways that audiences never saw. There were accidents on set, casting surprises, studio fights, and even secret ties to an illegal race. Today, we're peeling back the curtain with 20 weird facts about the Cannonball Run, the outrageous truths that made it one of the wildest productions of the 1980s. And just wait for the bonus fact. It involves a detail so insane, you'll never look at the movie the same way again. Buckle up, because this ride doesn't slow down. The movie was based on a real illegal race. What most viewers didn't know? The Cannonball Run wasn't just a fictional story, it was ripped straight from an outlaw tradition. Director Hal Needham and screenwriter Brock Yates were inspired by the Cannonball Baker Sea to Shining Sea Memorial Trophy Dash, a real underground race across America. Drivers would blast from New York to California, ignoring speed limits in a test of nerve and machine. Yates had actually organized and driven in the race years before the movie was made. The wild part? Some of the cars in the film were the same ones used in the real Cannonball. Yates' own Dodge van, fitted with hidden fuel tanks and radar detectors, makes a cameo. The movie blurred the line between fact and fiction, and for many racers, it wasn't just a movie, it was practically a documentary. Burt Reynolds didn't want to do it. At the time, Burt Reynolds was Hollywood's biggest box office draw, but he didn't want to sign on to the Cannonball Run. Why? He thought the script was too thin, little more than a series of car gags strung together. He reportedly only agreed because director Hal Needham, his close friend and frequent collaborator, convinced him with a massive paycheck. Reynolds later admitted he did the film purely for the money, joking, "It's not art, but it bought me a house." That cynicism carried into his performance, where he often ad-libbed his lines and treated scenes like one long inside joke. Ironically, his lack of seriousness matched the movie's tone perfectly, cementing it as a cult classic despite critics shredding it. Jackie Chan's American film debut. One of the strangest quirks of the Cannonball Run is that it features Jackie Chan in his very first American movie role. At the time, Chan was already a sensation in Hong Kong but virtually unknown to U.S. audiences. Hal Needham gave him a cameo as a high-tech Japanese driver. Yes, they mislabeled his nationality. Chan even performed his own stunts, including a brutal rooftop fight sequence. What's more, the closing credits feature outtakes of Chan's stunts, a trademark he later carried into all his Hong Kong hits. Audiences got their first taste of his slapstick meets danger style here, years before Rush Hour made him a household name in the West. Roger Moore played Roger Moore. In a bizarre twist of casting, Roger Moore essentially played himself. His character, Seymour Goldfarb Jr., is a wealthy man who believes he is actually James Bond. In the film, Moore parodies his own image driving an Aston Martin and wearing Bond-style suits. The meta joke was bold, but it came with a catch. Moore was still actively playing James Bond at the time, having just starred in For Your Eyes Only. His appearance in the Cannonball Run blurred the lines between his screen persona and real life, making it one of the earliest examples of self-parody in a mainstream blockbuster. Critics were baffled, but audiences loved the cheeky wink at Bond's invincibility. Dangerous stunts were done for real. Unlike today's CGI-heavy car chases, the Cannonball Run relied on practical stunts. That meant the crashes, jumps, and high-speed passes were all performed by real stunt drivers, often pushing the cars to dangerous limits. Director Hal Needham, himself a former stuntman, demanded authenticity. This led to near misses on set. One infamous crash involved a stunt car flipping out of control, nearly hitting the crew. Needham reportedly shrugged it off, saying, "That's the Cannonball spirit." For audiences, the reckless authenticity added to the thrill. But for the cast and crew, every day on set carried the risk of real injury, or worse. The ambulance was a real Cannonball vehicle, one of the strangest details hidden in plain sight. The ambulance driven by Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise wasn't just a movie prop. It was the exact same Dodge Tradesman ambulance that Hal Needham and Brock Yates used when they actually ran the Cannonball race in 1979. They had installed extra fuel tanks, oxygen masks, and even hospital gear to disguise themselves as medics racing coast to coast. In fact, they set a record in that very ambulance, crossing the country in just over 32 hours. When Needham made the film, he decided to immortalize the van on screen. That means audiences weren't just watching fiction, they were seeing a vehicle that had already made illegal racing history. It blurred the boundary between stunt and truth, turning the movie into a bizarre documentary within a comedy. Farrah Fawcett was cast at the last minute. At the dawn of the 1980s, Farrah Fawcett was America's sweetheart, but her career was shaky after leaving Charlie's Angels. Hal Needham offered her the role of Pamela Glover, the environmentalist who gets swept into Reynolds' chaotic plan. The part wasn't written with her in mind. Needham simply wanted a big female star to balance out the testosterone-heavy cast. Fawcett signed on days before shooting began. She later admitted she had no idea what the movie was really about until filming started. Her natural charm and comic timing, though, gave the film unexpected warmth. Critics dismissed her role as eye candy, but audiences adored her chemistry with Reynolds. Ironically, this last-minute casting saved her career from stalling, proving she could shine in comedy. Dean Martin was drunk. During filming one of the movie's most outrageous behind-the-scenes stories, Dean Martin filmed most of his scenes drunk. Martin, paired with Sammy Davis Jr. as fake priests, treated the set like a cocktail lounge. Crew members recalled that he often arrived late, martini glass in hand, and slurred through takes. Hal Needham didn't mind. In fact, he encouraged Martin to lean into his inebriated persona. The result was comedy gold. Martin's glazed expressions and loose delivery made the character funnier than scripted. But behind the humor was a sad truth. Martin was already slowing down from years of heavy drinking. The Cannonball Run marked one of his final big film roles, with his real-life vices bleeding directly into the performance. Sammy Davis Jr. nearly backed out. While Dean Martin embraced the chaos, Sammy Davis Jr. was hesitant from the start. He didn't like the idea of playing a priest, worried it would come across as sacrilegious. On top of that, he clashed with the grueling night shoots and high-energy stunts. According to crew reports, Davis even threatened to quit midway through production. Hal Needham and Burt Reynolds personally convinced him to stay, promising him more comic freedom and cutting some of his racier lines. Davis agreed, and his odd couple chemistry with Martin became one of the movie's highlights. But insiders later admitted, if Davis had walked, the entire comedy dynamic might have collapsed. The priest duo, after all, became one of the most iconic parts of the film. The movie was a box office smash. Despite critics, when The Cannonball Run hit theaters in 1981, critics destroyed it. The New York Times called it witless, while Variety dismissed it as a sloppy stunt reel. But audiences had a different opinion. They flocked to theaters for the wild car chases, star-studded cast, and sheer sense of fun. The movie raked in over $72 million domestically, making it one of the year's biggest hits. In fact, it outperformed more critically acclaimed films released that summer. The disconnect between critics and fans was staggering. For Reynolds, it proved that star power and spectacle mattered more than reviews. And before we move on, go ahead and like and subscribe because we're only halfway through this wild ride, and the next facts dive into injuries, lawsuits, and shocking cultural impacts you never saw coming. A stunt woman was seriously injured behind the laughs. The Cannonball Run had a dark incident. During one of the high-speed chase scenes, stuntwoman Heidi von Beltz was badly injured. She was doubling for Tara Buckman in the Lamborghini Countach sequence when the car crashed during filming. The accident left her paralyzed, and the tragedy cast a shadow over the R production. The crash raised questions about the safety protocols on set. Needham, a former stuntman himself, pushed for realism, but the price was devastating. The incident became one of Hollywood's most infamous stunt accidents, sparking industry-wide debates about better protections for performers. Audiences laughing in theaters had no idea the film carried such a heavy backstage cost. What looked like a throwaway gag on screen was, in truth, a moment that changed stunt safety in Hollywood forever. Dom DeLuise created Captain Chaos on the spot. One of the movie's strangest and most beloved moments was the appearance of Captain Chaos, Dom DeLuise's ridiculous superhero alter ego. But here's the twist. Captain Chaos wasn't in the script at all. DeLuise improvised the character, costume and all, during filming. Director Hal Needham loved it so much that he reshaped entire scenes around the bit. Reynolds reportedly hated it, rolling his eyes whenever DeLuise put on the cape. But audiences adored the absurdity, and Captain Chaos became one of the film's most quoted highlights. It wasn't polished Hollywood writing. It was pure chaos, invented in the moment. DeLuise's willingness to push boundaries gave the movie its surreal, unpredictable energy, showing how improvisation can sometimes steal the entire show. The Lamborghini Countach became a legend. If there's one car that audiences never forgot, it was the Lamborghini Countach LP400S that opened the movie. The sleek black supercar with its wedge-shaped body and thunderous V12 engine became a cinematic icon overnight. What audiences didn't realize was that Lamborghini itself provided the car to the filmmakers. They wanted the Countach immortalized in film, and the Cannonball Run delivered exactly that. The outrageous police-evading intro, complete with the famous chicks in a Lambo gag, cemented the Countach as the dream car of the 1980s. Car enthusiasts still call it the greatest product placement in automotive history. Not because it was subtle, but because the car looked so wild that it stole the movie. To this day, collectors seek out Countachs with Cannonball connections, paying absurd premiums just to own a piece of film racing history. The film had international versions with extra scenes. Here's a weird twist. Audiences in different countries didn't always see the same Cannonball Run. In some international markets, additional scenes were filmed to appeal to local audiences. For example, Jackie Chan's character got extended sequences in Asia, emphasizing his martial arts and gadgets. These alternate cuts gave certain actors more screen time depending on where the film was released. In Europe, Roger Moore's spoofing of James Bond was played up more heavily. In Japan, the high-tech humor around Chan's role got extra focus. It wasn't just localization, it was strategic marketing. Needham and the studio tailored the movie to different cultures long before that became common in Hollywood. Fans who have hunted down these versions say it's like watching an entirely different movie, filled with hidden gems the U.S. audience never saw. Reynolds and Needham's friendship defined the film. At its core, the Cannonball Run was less about cars and more about friendship, both on-screen and off. Burt Reynolds and director Hal Needham had been inseparable since their stuntman days. Needham had doubled for Reynolds, lived in his guest house, and directed him in hits like Smokey and the Bandit. By 1981, the pair had a formula: fast cars, easy laughs, and Reynolds' charm. Their bond was so strong that Reynolds signed on for Cannonball even when he thought the script was weak. He did it as a favor to his friend. That loyalty shines through in the film. The easy, joking tone wasn't just acting, it was real camaraderie bleeding onto the screen. Without their friendship, the movie would never have existed, and Hollywood would have lost one of its strangest blockbusters. The outtakes were more popular than the movie. One of the most groundbreaking things about the Cannonball Run wasn't even in the film itself. It was in the end credits. Director Hal Needham pioneered the use of blooper reels, showing Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise cracking up and breaking character. Audiences loved these outtakes so much that they became the movie's most iconic feature. For many viewers, the blooper reel was funnier than the scripted comedy. This innovation spread across Hollywood. Soon, films like Smokey and the Bandit 2 and Jackie Chan's Hong Kong hits adopted the tradition. What started as a playful way to pad the credits ended up changing how audiences experienced comedies. It turned mistakes into entertainment, making Cannonball not just a movie, but a blueprint for how to send people out of the theater laughing. Critics called it the death of cinema. While audiences adored it, critics savaged the Cannonball run. One reviewer called it the cinematic equivalent of a demolition derby. Others mocked it as an insult to storytelling, suggesting that Hollywood had abandoned art for star power and stunts. The harshest critic, film historian David Thompson, who later labeled it the death of cinema. To him, it represented Hollywood's worst instincts: shallow spectacle, lazy writing, and money over meaning. But here's the kicker: those very criticisms are what made it endure. Fans didn't want art, they wanted fun, and that gap between critic and crowd turned Cannonball into a cult phenomenon. What critics dismissed as trash ended up being remembered more than half the prestige films of 1981. The film spawned real copycat races. Life imitated art in unexpected ways. After the Cannonball run exploded at the box office, underground car rallies started springing up around the world. Drivers were inspired to recreate the lawless, coast-to-coast races they saw on screen. The most famous copycat? The Gumball 3000 launched in the late 1990s, which openly credited the film as inspiration. Even modern Cannonball record attempts, where drivers try to cross America in record time, owe their popularity to Needham's movie. Of course, these races are illegal, dangerous, and often deadly, but they carry the same spirit of rebellion and absurdity that fueled the film. What started as a comedy became a cultural movement, one that still has racers risking prison time today just to feel the same rush. Jamie Farr's chic character almost sparked protests among the wilder characters. Was Jamie Farr as the oil-rich sheik, a flamboyant parody that leaned heavily on Middle Eastern stereotypes. While audiences in 1981 laughed, the role nearly sparked backlash. Middle Eastern critics called it offensive, and some U.S. advocacy groups debated protests. But because the movie was marketed as broad slapstick, the controversy never fully ignited. Farr himself admitted years later that he worried about how the part aged, acknowledging it wouldn't be acceptable by modern standards. Still, his exaggerated performance added to the movie's anything goes reputation. It was a reminder that the Cannonball run didn't just push speed limits, it pushed cultural ones too, often recklessly. The sequel was even crazier. 2 years later, Cannonball Run 2 hit theaters. And if the first movie was chaotic, the sequel was total madness. The cast grew even larger, with Frank Sinatra bizarrely added in for one scene. The stunts were wilder, the comedy broader, and the story almost non-existent. But lightning didn't strike twice. The sequel was trashed by critics and underperformed compared to the original. Yet it still cemented Cannonball Run as a franchise of pure excess. Even in failure, the sequel showed just how much the originals had captured a cultural moment. The truth: without the bizarre charm of the first film, the second simply felt like imitation. The film was once sued for encouraging dangerous driving. Here's the shocker: the Cannonball Run was dragged into court. After its release, critics claimed it glamorized reckless speeding. In one case, a lawsuit alleged the movie inspired a copycat crash. While the suit was eventually thrown out, it highlighted the film's strange legacy, blurring entertainment and real-world danger. Hal Needham dismissed the complaints, saying, Ha, it's a comedy, not a driver's manual. But the fact that lawyers tried to hold a Hollywood comedy responsible for real traffic deaths shows how powerful its influence was. In the end, the Cannonball Run wasn't just a comedy. It was a bizarre experiment where stunts, celebrity egos, and outlaw spirit collided. It broke rules, ignored critics, and left a cultural tire mark still visible today. If you enjoyed this wild ride, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your favorite fact. And remember, when it comes to Hollywood chaos, the Cannonball Run proved one thing: sometimes the crash is the point.